I cut my mom off from my daughter on her first birthday. Mom used to put my brother and I in shitty situations, especially regarding an old abusive boyfriend. She got her life together, but years later brought the boyfriend back and blames me for being upset and cutting her out of my kid's life. Please forgive me in advance for this absolute book of a post. It includes a lot of history on my mom and our relationship together. My mom had me when she was 17 years old. My dad was in the picture, but they divorced when I was 3. We lived in a very small town in Ennis, Oklahoma, where there wasn't much to do outside of party. She had purchased a house with some money she'd won from a lawsuit. It was a car accident, and didn't work. We spent every day together when I was very young, and she would often have me along for outings with friends, parties, and pretty much everything else. While she didn't use when I was in the womb, recreational drugs were always a part of her life. Before and after my birth, my mom was always emotionally unstable, which combined with the partying always made things much more difficult. Growing up, the people my mom chose to surround herself with were usually pretty shady. Her boyfriends, there were many, were usually pretty sketchy. Most of the time they weren't abusive, but made stupid choices and put us into bad situations. However, when I was 10, my mom met this guy, Chris. Chris was a freaking nightmare. On the surface, Chris was just an idiot. He was a good-looking Mexican man with muscles, a 5 o'clock shadow, and a serious drinking problem. My mom was freaking nuts about this guy. Chris was the kind of person who, when sober, just thought he was the smartest person alive and would gladly tell you so. When he was drunk, anything that didn't go his way instantly set him into a violent rage. He would never hesitate to shove my mom or me around, rip the phone line out of the wall so we couldn't call the cops, get into fist fights with anyone, anything, the works. Shortly after meeting him, my mom got pregnant. Before my little brother was 1 year old, Chris had been arrested for domestic violence and was spending a long stint in jail. He had been arrested before for his abuse of my mom, but she would never press charges. He had done something stupid at a local bar and gotten into a fight with someone else. But it was nice that he was gone, and I begged my mom to never let him come back. She knew he was bad for us, but as soon as he was out of jail, he was back around. The abuse jail return cycle was a thing for the next couple of years. My mom would split off from Chris, but always use "your brother needs a dad" as an excuse to bring him back around. She knew I didn't like it, so she would constantly lie to me about having him around. She was also always getting higher drunk, and it always fueled the problems. I always had the option to move in with my dad, but stayed because I was the only one who could actually keep my little brother safe. When I was 15, I'd had enough. I cut my mom off, told her she needed to get her shit together and not to call me until she did. I moved in with my dad. My mom finally pressed charges against Chris and sold her house in the small town. Chris had practically kidnapped my baby brother in a drunken rage. They found him walking down a railroad track in the country at 3 a.m. in sub-freezing temps. Even his whole family cut him out of their lives. Eventually, she moved away from the small town and took my brother with her. She started to get sober. By the time I was 18, she had moved back to Oklahoma, but to a different town about 4 hours away. My mom still had my brother, was clean, and was about to graduate nursing school. Chris had made attempts to contact them, but had been turned down and reported for violating the restraining order that protected both my mom and little brother. Things seemed to be getting better. In the following decade, my mom stayed clean, or at least didn't get caught using, kept her nursing job, and got remarried. I had met my wife. We lived about 5 hours away but would regularly see my mom and brother. My mom had apologized for everything that happened in the past and we'd rebuilt our relationship. Around 4 years ago, my mom was unhappy in her marriage. Nothing was horribly wrong. She had married someone the same age as her dad and they had different goals in life. My mom was making good money and was financially independent. She had started making comments about getting divorced and living on her own. Every great now and then, she'd bring up how passionate her relationship with Chris was and that she missed being loved like that. She would always counter that with things like, "I would never bring him back, he was terrible," or something to that effect. Eventually, COVID hit and being a nurse, Mom posed a huge risk to her older husband. She took this as an opportunity to move into her own rental home and away from her husband. She started making her own life without him but stayed married to him because she didn't want to deal with the hassle of going through a divorce. I always suggested she should move forward with the divorce because she was unhappy. She has always been afraid of conflict and tried to avoid it at all costs. So she just didn't get a divorce. Eventually she even bought her own home and now lives apart from her husband. Last year, my wife and I welcomed our first child. My mom was ecstatic. She and my brother took time off work and made the trip to stay at our house and wait almost a month for the baby to be born. The day we brought the baby home from the hospital, my mom let a comment slip that blew my mind. She let it slip that Alice, Chris' sister, said our baby was adorable. I had no idea my mom was still in contact with her, and I knew that the sister had once cut Chris out, but I told her the following. There is no one who has anything to do with Chris that will ever have anything to do with my daughter. That man has caused enough harm in our lives and I'm not about to let it continue into hers. I don't want him to even know her name, let alone what she looks like. Please do not share anything about her with anyone who has anything to do with him. He knowing anything about her is a safety issue for all of us. He would absolutely use her to get to you just like he used to do with my brother. She was upset, but agreed that he had always had a negative effect on everything and said she wouldn't share anything with anyone else. I asked her if she had been contacting him and she, very expressively, said absolutely not. I told her that he would jeopardize everything she has worked for and that any involvement with him would absolutely ruin anything we have rebuilt. Fast forward 1 year. My mom, little brother, and the whole family are visiting for my daughter's first birthday. The night before the party, my wife and mom are in the car after getting some groceries. My mom answers her phone and a man, not her husband, is on the other line. He goes on to talk about how he misses my mom and that he wishes she could come back already. They end the call with a mutual, "I love you." My wife came home and told my brother and me about how odd it was and asked my brother if he knew what was going on. My brother was pretty visibly upset. He said, "I know, but I can't tell you." He's an adult now but has been financially supported by my mom while he's in school. I told him I understand and that I won't pressure him for a name or anything. I asked, "Will I be mad?" He responded with, "Well, I'm fucking livid." I confronted my mom about it. She lied over and over again but eventually gave in. Not only was it Chris, but she had convinced him to move to the same town as her when she got her rental house 4 years ago. She'd been blackmailing my brother into not telling me, but there had been serious safety concerns. I looked online and found several instances in the local newspaper where he'd been arrested. Each time, she's tried to push him away but she always brings him back because she's lonely. I told her that, because she'd brought my brother and her mom, they can stay for the party. After the party, we're cutting my mom off completely. I told her I wouldn't allow her to have anything to do with my daughter until she'd found some way to prove Chris had been out of her life for 6 months, and she'd been working with a therapist for 6 months. She was very upset, but she didn't really fight it much. She said she'd get rid of him, but I really can't trust that at all. I asked her if her husband knew. Of course, he didn't. I told her that she needs to tell him. I told her she had 4 days to tell him in person or that I was going to call him. She absolutely fucking lost it. She started blaming me, saying things like, "You're so judgmental. Why would you want to hurt my husband like that? You're just trying to punish me. Why are you so mean?" I was blown away that this seemed to bother her more than the idea of losing her grandkid. I also tried to explain that these are her actions that are hurting people, not that they know it's happening. I also tried to explain that she's jeopardizing her nursing license and everything she's worked for, just for this asshole. She didn't want to hear it. 4 days later, they had gone home and I received a message from my mom saying that she'd told her husband. I called him to check. She'd gone over and talked to him, but pretty much lied about the entire thing. I told him the truth. He wasn't surprised, but he was upset. My mom started texting shortly after about how terrible of a thing I'd done and how she was so upset that I wanted to hurt her husband. She said she hoped that I was happy that she was getting a divorce now and that I'd punished her. It's been a week since this went down. My brother has now ditched her as well and moved in with my wife, daughter, and I've got a slew of shitty messages from my mom blaming me for all of this, calling me names, saying I'm too judgmental, etc. I'm honestly just blown away that she kept up this lie for years, basically blackmailed my brother, and is risking everything and still defends her actions. I don't want to lose my mom and I don't want my daughter to grow up without her grandma. But my mom clearly doesn't respect my wishes as a parent, our rebuilt relationship, or any personal boundaries I have. This is not our original story. This story was posted on Reddit by a user who was looking for relationship advices. Thank you for watching or listening. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe so we can continue sharing stories of people around the world.
The craziest stories from the hotel workers on Reddit.
1. I worked in a decent hotel in college, was the night auditor. One night the police came in and went directly to a room around 2 a.m. They escorted a prostitute out and asked to speak to the manager. After they were done speaking with my manager, The officer handed me the phone and she told me to go in and clean up the room. I never made beds or did any of that, so I wasn't sure exactly what she wanted. I went to the room and there was trash everywhere. There were uncapped syringes, used packages that had contained drugs, and general filth everywhere. I called the manager back to tell her that I wasn't touching anything because of the uncapped syringes. They were literally all over the place and I wasn't going to pick up piles of clothes or move blankets. The manager said that if I didn't clean the room I was fired. I said fine. You have a half an hour to get here because I am leaving. I was the only one there overnight. As she pulled into the parking lot a short time later, I walked over to my car, didn't even wait for her to get inside. Replies. I wouldn't have even waited for her to get there. What the hell was she thinking? What a moron. I go OSHA on them and tell them it's against federal law to fire me considering how they didn't provide me with hazmat biological waste training in the first place. Even if that's blowing smoke up my ass, but at that point what have I got to lose?
2. Posted this before. I have a friend that owns a small motel just off a highway. I would hang out with him and chat on some late nights. One night, he got a call that one of the guests heard a loud crash in the room next door. Checked the computer and saw that the room was unoccupied. Friend and I go to check it out. We knock and there is no answer. He opens the door and there was a cat in the room. It knocked over a lamp and smashed it. It was super friendly and came right to us. We took it back to the office and looked at the room records. The prior person that was in the room abandoned the cat when he checked out 3 days earlier. He was already on the other side of the country when we called him, and he said he was not coming back for the cat. My friend took ownership of the cat and now she is the motel cat. She walks all around the property and takes care of any mice or critters. She even has her picture on the wall as one of the employees. Not sure why the maid service did not see it when the room was being cleaned. We think that the vacuum scared the cat